Mary had always believed that heartbreak arrived loudly, with slammed doors, raised voices, cruel words you could never take back. But the hardest heartbreaks don't come like that at all. They arrive quietly. So quietly, in fact, that by the time you finally recognize them, they've already made themselves at home inside your life. My name is Mary. I'm 66 years old, and for most of my life, being a mother was the one thing I was absolutely certain I had done right. Especially with my son, Daniel. After my husband passed away 12 years ago, it was just the two of us for a long time. We learned how to survive together. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, packed his lunches at 5 a.m, sat through football games in the freezing cold, and somehow still managed to keep the lights on. And every sacrifice felt worth it, because Daniel was kind back then, gentle. The kind of boy who kissed my forehead before leaving for school. The kind who used to say, "Don't worry, Mom, when I make it someday, you'll never struggle again." I believed him. I think mothers always do. Then he met Vanessa. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, I truly tried to welcome her. I did. I invited her over for dinner. I asked about her family. I even gave her my late mother's casserole dish the first Thanksgiving they spent together. But from the beginning, there was a coldness in her that I couldn't quite explain. Not rudeness, exactly, just distance. Like she had already decided who I was before she ever really knew me. Still, I ignored it, because Daniel looked happy. And when you're a mother, sometimes you convince yourself your discomfort is a small price to pay for your child's happiness. At first, the changes were small, easy to excuse. Daniel stopped calling every evening the way he used to. Then it became every few days. Then sometimes 2 weeks would pass before I heard his voice. When I called, it often went to voicemail. "Sorry, Mom, busy week. Sorry, Mom, we've just had a lot going on." I told myself that was normal. Young couples build their own lives. That's what they're supposed to do. But deep down, I felt it. That slow, painful feeling of becoming unnecessary. The dinners became awkward too. I remember one Sunday afternoon sitting at their dining table while Vanessa scrolled through her phone almost the entire meal. Daniel barely looked up from his plate. I had spent 3 hours making pot roast from scratch. Daniel used to love my pot roast, but that evening he just shrugged and said, "It's good, Mom. Good. Not wonderful, like before. Not you always make it best, just good." Funny how a single word can make a room feel colder. I started noticing other things too. Vanessa answering questions directed at Daniel. Vanessa deciding holiday plans before anyone asked me. Vanessa casually mentioning that older people could sometimes become emotionally dependent on their children. I remember sitting there smiling politely while my chest tightened. I thought to myself, is that how she sees me? A burden waiting to happen? But I kept quiet, always quiet, because I didn't want Daniel caught between us. That's the thing nobody tells you about motherhood when you get older. Sometimes loving your child means swallowing pain they never even notice. Then came the afternoon everything changed. It was raining that day, soft rain, the kind that taps gently against the windows and makes the whole world feel tired. I had stopped by their house unexpectedly to bring over a folder Daniel needed for some insurance paperwork. He'd asked me about it weeks earlier, and I finally found the documents tucked away in my filing cabinet. I didn't even knock right away because the front door was slightly open. I could hear them talking in the kitchen. At first, I wasn't really listening. Then I heard my name, and something about the tone in Vanessa's voice made me pause. "She's gonna call eventually," she said. Daniel laughed softly. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, just amused. Then he said the words I still hear in my head sometimes late at night. "Good," I canceled her card. Just like that. Calm, casual, almost proud. I froze. My hand was still resting against the door frame, and for a second, I honestly wondered if I'd misunderstood him. My card? The small emergency credit card he'd insisted on managing for me after I struggled with online banking last year. The card connected to my own account. Vanessa let out this little laugh and said, "Honestly, it's probably better this way. She relies on you too much." Relies on you too much. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not because of the money. God knows I've lived through harder things than financial inconvenience. No. What shattered me was the realization behind it. They thought I was weak, confused, dependent, like I was some fragile old woman they could quietly manage behind the scenes. And standing there in that hallway, listening to my own son speak about me like I was a problem to solve. Something inside me became very still. Not angry. Not yet, just awake. I quietly set the folder down by the door without making a sound. And as I walked back to my car in the rain, I realized something that frightened me more than the canceled card itself. I no longer recognized the boy I raised. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder if they had been underestimating me all along. The strange thing about heartbreak is that life keeps moving afterward. The sun still rises, the coffee still brews, bills still arrive in the mailbox like nothing in the world has changed. But inside you, something is different forever. For days after overhearing Daniel and Vanessa in that kitchen, I barely slept. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above my bed, replaying his words over and over in my mind. Good. I canceled her card. Not angry, not guilty. Just careless. That was the part that hurt the most. Carelessness. As if my dignity meant so little to him that he never even imagined I might find out. I kept asking myself where I had gone wrong. That's what mothers do, you know. Even when someone wounds us deeply, our first instinct is still to blame ourselves. I thought about Daniel as a little boy after his father died. He was only 14 then, 14 years old and trying so hard to act brave while the world collapsed around him. I still remember hearing him cry through his bedroom wall at night, softly, like he didn't want me to hear, and I remember standing outside his door with tears running down my own face, whispering promises to myself. He will never feel alone. He will never feel abandoned. The strange thing about heartbreak is that life keeps moving afterward. The sun still rises, the coffee still brews, bills still arrive in the mailbox like nothing in the world has changed. But inside you, something is different forever. For days after overhearing Daniel and Vanessa in that kitchen, I barely slept. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above my bed, replaying his words over and over in my mind. Good. I canceled her card. Not angry, not guilty. Just careless. That was the part that hurt the most. Carelessness. As if my dignity meant so little to him that he never even imagined I might find out. I kept asking myself where I had gone wrong. That's what mothers do, you know. Even when someone wounds us deeply, our first instinct is still to blame ourselves. I thought about Daniel as a little boy after his father died. He was only 14 then, 14 years old and trying so hard to act brave while the world collapsed around him. I still remember hearing him cry through his bedroom wall at night, softly, like he didn't want me to hear, and I remember standing outside his door with tears running down my own face, whispering promises to myself. He will never feel alone. He will never feel abandoned. I will carry whatever I have to carry. And I did. God, I did. I worked overtime shifts until my feet swelled so badly I could barely remove my shoes at night. I skipped meals sometimes so Daniel could join school trips without worrying about money. I learned how to fix leaking sinks from YouTube videos because hiring plumbers was too expensive. There were Christmases when I wrapped dollar store gifts like they were treasures just so he'd still feel magic in the house. And the whole time, I never wanted praise for any of it. I was his mother. That was enough. Or at least, I thought it was. But there's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing someone you protected with your entire life has slowly started viewing you as a burden, not a person, a responsibility, an inconvenience. I think that realization ages you overnight. Still, I didn't confront him. A younger version of me probably would have. But at 66, you learn something important. Silence can reveal more than anger ever will. So instead, I became quiet, careful, observant. The next time Daniel called, his voice sounded overly cheerful. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" I almost laughed, because suddenly I could hear it. The checking. The subtle need to make sure I hadn't noticed anything. And for the first time in my life, I decided not to protect his comfort. "Oh, I'm fine," I told him softly, and technically, it wasn't a lie. I was hurt, disappointed, heartbroken. But I was no longer blind. That changes a person. Little by little, I started putting pieces of my life back together, not dramatically, quietly. One morning, I drove to the bank myself. The young man at the desk explained that several account notifications had been redirected months ago to Daniel's email for convenience. Convenience. Funny word. I smiled politely and changed every password, every contact setting, every authorization attached to my name. The entire time, my hands stayed steady. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt clarity. After that, I went home and pulled out old storage boxes from the hall closet. Inside were folders I hadn't opened in years. Insurance papers, property documents, retirement statements, letters from my late husband. Pieces of my own life I had ignored while centering everyone else's. And as I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by paperwork and dust and fading photographs, I realized something painful. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Mary. I had become only mom, only caretaker, only helper, only support system. I thought to myself, maybe that's why it became so easy for them to forget I was a person too. Around that same time, I started reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to properly in years. My old friend Joanne invited me to lunch after church one Sunday. We sat in a tiny diner near the highway drinking weak coffee and talking for nearly 3 hours. And for the first time in a very long time, nobody needed anything from me. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody dismissed me. Nobody looked impatient while I spoke. I came home that afternoon feeling lighter, not healed, but remembered. Meanwhile, Daniel and Vanessa seemed more relaxed than ever. I noticed it immediately. Vanessa had this subtle confidence now. She spoke slower around me, kinder, almost overly kind, in the way people speak to someone they believe is fragile. Daniel started offering to help manage more things: bills, appointments, paperwork, each offer wrapped neatly in concern. And every time, I smiled gently and said, "I've already handled it." I could see the flicker of confusion in his eyes, because they truly believed I depended on them. They never stopped to wonder how much I had quietly protected them all these years. Daniel didn't know the down payment assistance I gave them came from money his father left for me specifically. Vanessa didn't know I had covered 2 of their missed mortgage payments during Daniel's layoff without ever mentioning it. And neither of them understood something mothers rarely say out loud. The strongest women often look the softest. One evening, I stood alone in my kitchen washing dishes while the sunset turned the windows gold. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Sad? Yes. But not afraid. Because the truth was beginning to settle inside me like stone. They thought canceling my card had taken away my independence. But all it had really done was force me to remember I still had it. A few weeks later, Daniel finally realized something was different. Not because I told him, because I stopped asking. No more phone calls reminding him about appointments, no more checking whether they needed groceries, no more quiet little transfers from my savings whenever life became difficult for them. I simply stepped back. And when you've spent years holding people up, they notice the moment your hands are no longer there. It happened on a Thursday evening. I remember because the sky outside was heavy with clouds, and I had just finished watering the flowers on my porch when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway unexpectedly. For a moment, my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. That's motherhood too, I suppose. No matter how deeply your child hurts you, part of you still lights up when you see them coming home. He looked uneasy walking toward the house. Older somehow. Tired. Vanessa stayed in the passenger seat staring down at her phone. That alone told me something was wrong. Daniel stepped inside and glanced around like he was noticing the place for the first time in years. The living room looked different now, brighter, cleaner, peaceful. There were fresh flowers on the table, music playing softly from the kitchen, a half-finished puzzle near the window, little signs of a life continuing, a life that no longer revolved entirely around him. "You've been busy," he said carefully. I smiled. "I suppose I have." He hesitated before sitting down at the table. Then came the question, "Mom, did you change the accounts?" Straight to it. No apology, no explanation, just confusion. I folded the dish towel in my hand slowly before answering. "Yes." His forehead tightened immediately. "I was just trying to help you," he said. "You know that, right?" Help me. I thought about that word for a long moment. Then I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the man I had spent decades protecting from pain, disappointment, and responsibility whenever I could. And suddenly I understood something heartbreaking. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had confused access with love, control with care. "I know you believe that," I said quietly. He stared at me like he didn't understand why those words sounded sad instead of comforting. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence between parent and child is different from any other silence in the world. It carries history inside it. Birthdays, arguments, bedtime stories, funerals, every version of love you've ever shared. Finally, he sighed heavily and rubbed his face. "Vanessa thinks you've been distant." I almost smiled at that. Distant. Such a gentle word for grief. "I think," I said softly, "I've just been remembering how to take care of myself again." That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have, because anger at least would have meant I was still emotionally trapped inside the role they assigned me. But calmness frightened him. He looked around the kitchen again before speaking. "You could have talked to me." There it was. The part children never understand. Sometimes mothers stay silent because we finally understand talking won't change anything. I sat down across from him and folded my hands together. "Daniel," I said carefully, "do you know what hurt me most?" His eyes dropped immediately, which meant he knew, at least part of him knew. "It wasn't the card," I continued. "It was realizing you truly believed I wouldn't survive without you." His face changed then, not defensive, ashamed. And for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the little boy he used to be. "I never meant—" "I know," I interrupted gently. And strangely enough, I did know. That's the tragedy of moments like these. People rarely wake up one morning deciding to become cruel. It happens slowly, through entitlement, through influence, through convenience, one small compromise at a time. "I spent so many years trying to make sure you never felt abandoned," I whispered. "I just never expected to feel abandoned by you." He looked like those words physically hurt him. But they were true, and at my age, truth begins to matter more than comfort. Daniel sat quietly for a long time after that. Then finally he asked, almost in a childlike voice, "So what happens now?" I looked out the kitchen window at the darkening sky, and honestly, for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel pressured to have all the answers. "I think," I said slowly, "we learn who we are without pretending anymore." He nodded, though I'm not sure he fully understood. Maybe one day he will. Maybe one day he'll realize that mothers are not endless wells you can draw from forever without eventually reaching the bottom. Before he left, he stood awkwardly near the front door, like he wanted to hug me but wasn't sure he still had the right. And I realized then that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing.